Hey, I'm just going to have you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I am DL Cordero. I go by DL and also Diana. They're both equally my name, but I usually write under the name DL Cordero. So I'm a writer. I primarily write sci-fi fantasy, or a little bit of poetry, and a little bit of horror because I like twisted things. So it's kind of me. I do a lot of like trans advocacy and like LGBT advocacy in a few different ways. Like a lot of my writing has to do with like themes of identity and like puts diverse characters like of different races, sexual orientations and genders, like they're the central characters.
Right.
And so like donations and all this other stuff. So I guess that's another part of like what I do. And then in my professional life, I am a mental health counselor. Yes.
And some of that work comes through in your writing as well. Is that true?
Oh yeah, it does. Like the current manuscript that I'm writing, like Dice and Lucy, you've read a few things from it.
Yep.
Like I think a lot of like my experience working with trauma like shows up in different ways now that I've like revised several chapters, like just how people dissociate or how people try and incorporate that into their identity and overcome that. I think it shows up in the writing quite a bit just from my personal experience and then also working with clients.
Right. And you do it in such a way too that it's not like beating your readers over the head, which is something that is, I think, probably challenging to do. Do you think about that a lot, or is it just like a natural knack?
Think about what specifically?
Like how, for example, like how do you show a character in a trauma response?
Yeah, I when I started writing Dice and Lucy, like I was avoiding doing that quite a bit, just because like when you work through trauma and then you think that you've gotten through it and then it like shows up in a completely different way and you're like, fuck, I'm still not done with this shit.
Yeah.
And like I realized like I was avoiding incorporating more of the trauma response, such as like dissociation or like flashbacks. Like I was avoiding doing that because like it was bringing up a lot for me in terms of emotional distress. And so like I got checked on that by like our writing group. Like this is not realistic. This is not how a person responds to that. I'm like, oh, but I don't want to. And so now, like as I'm going through the writing, like I'm being much more intentional about like making it more realistic while also still having it be a sci-fi fantasy. Like there's a lot of fantasy involved in the work, and it's like there's like squeamish demons and prickly angels. And I don't want trauma to be like this central part of all of the things.
Right.
But I have been trying to be much more conscious of like doing that realistically when I'm focused on the human.
And is it okay if I ask why you're doing that? I'm just gonna leave it open.
Why I'm incorporating like the sci-fi fantasy part to it?
Well, like I'm imagining that there was something that you weren't seeing in sci-fi and fantasy, and you're writing that, and so I was wondering if you could talk about like how that started to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I've written like pretty much all my whole life. Like it's just something that I always like did, and just creating all these kind of stories in my head, and like even when I was like about to go to sleep, I'd like play around with these characters in my head, like this is gonna happen, and eventually over time I started writing them down, and it wasn't until like a few years ago where I was like, a lot of these stories that I've written have a very like repetitive theme of like someone who's trying to like overcome adversity in order to like settle into their identity.
Mhm.
And like after realizing that that was like just a common thread in all of my work, I was like, oh, I think I'm writing about my own experiences. Like I think I'm writing about myself as like a Latinx person and also like a trans person, a queer person trying to figure themselves out. Like I
Oh,
realized that
wow.
way later. And so like part of why I continue to write those themes into my narratives and why I choose my characters very intentionally is like I find it so meaningful when I can relate to characters in narratives that I'm reading or
Right.
watching or enjoying. Like it's just such a powerful experience. I think there's a lot of isolation that exists in queer communities as well as trans communities. Like it
Yeah.
just is. And like I find it meaningful when I read that, and I would like to do the same for other people. And like if we're gonna be doing that, we have to be realistic about like what trans and queer people experience in
Right.
like, society. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of sexual victimization. There's so much of that that so many of my friends and like family experience. Um, so I don't think it would be fair to include those characters without touching on real issues that happen in our community. But I
Right.
also want it to be fun. And I'm a very dark individual, so there's a lot of dark humor.
There is. And it is a lot of fun when it happens too. Um, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I can't at the moment. But I'm just like smiling a lot because like I remember hitting those spots and being like, oh yeah, this is great. Like we're in kind of like a desperate situation, and something really funny just happened. So it's like that
Yeah.
that's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Um,
like I really enjoy putting in that humor because I also think that speaks a lot to like the resiliency that exists in our community. Like
yeah.
if we're gonna deal with all this shit, like we gotta find ways to deal with it. And humor is definitely one of the ways that I've coped with a lot of trauma and discrimination. And so I like incorporating it into the narratives.
What I like about the story that you're talking about now too is the way community shows up in that story.
Hmm.
Like you're and it's not just a group of folks saving someone, because that definitely happens. They're learning together too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Oh yeah. Like part of one of the themes that also shows up is a lot about like what makes a monster, what makes like a demon a demon.
Yeah.
Like what does that mean? Because I think a lot that word gets tossed around a lot. Like I've gotten it tossed out at me a lot of times, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm dope as hell. Like I'm like I try really hard to be pretty nice to people, even when I don't like them.
Yeah.
And so like I don't exactly understand like why that words get tossed around so much. And so like a part of like the work is like having the reader try and figure out what makes a monster a monster. And so I'd like to put in like maybe a stereotypical villain, like
Okay.
in the one that we're talking about right now, the story that we're talking about, like stereotypical villain, like the epitome of what would be a monster is like the human traffickers.
Hmm.
Like that label would probably get attached to people like that.
Hmm.
And then you could really easily like make it like evil versus good.
Hmm.
Like the central characters are some of the survivors, but they have a lot of agency in the book. Like
Yeah.
Dice is just mowing down like all these traffickers. Like they pose no obstacle whatsoever because she's got a fucking demon like giving her a scythe and like she's just like whipping through people.
Right.
So I like to fuck with that like it's all or nothing. Like it's all like villain versus victim, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
And so like the characters have to grow into that, you know, if we're talking about trauma, like you have a few different ways that you cope with that, but first you have to acknowledge the trauma and like try and figure out who you are after it's happened. So all the characters in the book, minus the like people are just getting mowed down because I don't care about them in any way. They all experience some kind of trauma, some kind of grappling with identity, and they're trying to figure out, how do they define themselves? Are they actually monsters? Because they do a lot of shitty things.
Yeah.
But they also do a lot of good things. And so like how do they define themselves? And they're all like trying to define themselves and then also define themselves within the context of their relationships that are forming. Like who Sammy is in relation to Dice, who Dice is in relation to Lucy. So there's a lot of growth that I'm trying to put in there. And like a lot of growth I think has to happen in community. It's really hard, I think, to grow as a person just independently all by yourself without contact with other people. Because I think a lot of the contact with other people necessitates growth.
Right.
So that's kind of why I've been writing it that way, just like the community growing as a whole.
That's awesome. And I know I really appreciate seeing that, because even as someone who works in the healing arts, I've seen, you know, I mean, community does the best it can, I feel. And there's like, you know, that circling out thing that happens sometimes. And there's all of a sudden no community for that person or people who've been circled out. And so I think it's really important to see stories like that, because I don't feel like there are models for that in like the overarching society, I guess. Like we have like on paper what it looks like with the house and the fence and the whatever kind of family or whatever, but I feel like it's as we all start like really knowing who we are and just where that need to be who we are, like just totally absolutely overcomes any fear. It's messy coming out of that, and it's nice to have community even if we're all messy together. Yeah. And I don't know, I hear a lot of words being thrown around like about like, you know, you have to have better tools, yes, and you know, like in the meantime, you know, like you said, it's like it's very difficult for people to do it on their own. And I know I've received that message a lot, like that whole like, oh, you can do it, you'll figure it out, and you know, like that kind of thing. And I'm like, but my brain is a blank slate, like I don't know where to go from here, you know. I'm just bumbling along.
Yeah. Like trying to do the best that we can, but then like sometimes we just need other people, like we just do. I really relate to what you're saying about like, you know, you get told that you're supposed to be able to do a certain thing, like get over this thing that has happened so long ago. And I'm just like, well, what switch do you want me to like fucking like turn on and off over here? Like it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, like that one? Is that the button? Should I press the button? Or pull that? Yeah, it's totally like that. Someone was telling me that the other day. They're just like, wait, how long has it been since you experienced that? You should just forget about it. You know, like just, it's fine. It was 20 years ago. And I'm like, yes. And you know, as a body worker, I'm like, the body holds a lot of information, and if we don't know how to access it, even if we unlock it, all of a sudden it's unlocked and we're like, oh fuck, what do we do with this? Like, you know.
I know, right? It's like, you know, if we could have fixed it by now, like we would have. It's not like choosing to be in emotional distress over this thing that happened when I was 3 years old. Like that's not exactly my choice right now. It's happening, and I need some help trying to figure out how to deal with it.
Right.
But I mean, that really comes back to, I think, a few different, like, like contextual factors, like American society as a whole is very like bootstrap mentality, like do things by yourself. And then like if we look at like communities of color, like there's just a lot of like stigma against like talking about the problems that exist in your household with other people. Like that's especially true like with my Puerto Rican family. Like we don't talk about shit. This is our laundry. We
tight
clean,
lips.
right? and then like seeking help for like mental distress or emotional distress is like really seen negatively. You're crazy. So I think like not having the tools comes down to a lot of contextual factors that exist in our surrounding, and we can learn them. I think it takes a lot of unlearning of things that we grew up with and didn't challenge in order to step into like growth as a person and like trying to deal with our shit.
So here's a question I always have is like, how do we hold space for each other while we're being messy together and learning together as we're unraveling all of this stuff, because similarly, I mean, I grew up in a household where we didn't talk about anything. Like, I don't even know most of my family history. They're just like these little kind of hints, and yeah, anytime anyone brought up anything like, well, maybe we should go to therapy or something, it's like, ooh, that's a big bad word. Like, what are you saying? What are you calling me? Like, you know what I mean? And it wasn't until fairly recently, in the last 8 years or so, really becoming a massage therapist and then needing to learn how to do my job better to hold space for clients and stuff. It wasn't really until then where I started learning a whole lot more. I mean, there were bits, I've done different things along the way, but it was like, it wasn't just for me anymore. It was for the people I was working with. And I don't feel like I was always super graceful with that either. But I started realizing kind of all of us are in that same boat on both sides of the table. And so I'm just always wondering how do we do that?
Like holding
or how do we move towards it?
It's a hard question to answer, I don't know that there's necessarily a right or a wrong answer for that. Kind of like what I think helps me have more patience for other people, when like I think something that helps me do that is like a combination of empathy and like understanding that people are just like they're dealing with a lot of shit, like probably that I don't see. And then also establishing boundaries, like being wounded ourselves does not excuse the wounds that we do to other people. Like, that's not it's not. So like, I think it, like for me, it's like getting really concrete about this behavior is unacceptable to me. These are the things that I will do if you engage in this behavior. And a certain point, like I can't give you any wiggle room. So it's kind of like, it's both allowing for flexibility, but then also being really clear on like what you can't handle. Like, I don't know. I don't think my bandwidth allows for like people to repeatedly like fuck me over. Like there's just like no
that's fair.
Do that. Like I can't do that. And so like if someone continues to engage in the same mistake over and over, we gotta cut that shit out. Like I can't do that. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. So like that answer makes sense. It's like a both and.
We have the tools we have when we have them, and and that's what we have, and we do our best with it, for sure. I mean, that's what we can do. I know I learned a lot about boundaries being a massage therapist as well, because you have to. And it's difficult, like where and the boundaries are different with everyone too, and sometimes on different days. So yeah, and that, I don't know, I think that's where I'm coming from. Like, I'm not trying to be like all, you know, making this all about me, but I like these to be conversations too. It's just I started feeling really lonely because all of a sudden I lived in a world where I was constantly creating boundaries
Mhm.
in all of my work. So as a massage therapist and as a teacher, and also as you know, whatever odds and ends I did as well. Just learning like where's that boundary, and but not necessarily knowing exactly what's safe for me. It's funny, like the other day I was thinking about someone who's kind of in my life who like they have kind of trickstery energy, and
Mm.
for some reason was really contemplating on, like, you know, like the Aztec and Mayan tricksters. They're a little more vicious and they're just like
Oh, okay.
real careless, real
Yeah.
not careless, but just like they're not really cognizant of like maybe it's not funny to the human that they have the human's entrails in their mouths kind of thing. Like I don't know them real well, but I just remember a certain one, like a picture, and something like I really appreciate the reckless tricksters or something like that because they teach us to be aware of where our boundaries need to be,
Yeah.
you know, so that we don't end up with our entrails in their mouths. It's like it was something like that, you know. It's just like um
Yeah.
and I I mean we all experience it, right? We like open up so much, and or whatever it is, it's this constant dance, and then like where do we put the boundary, and we don't always know.
Yeah.
um
I think it's
and
a lot of trial and error, you know? Like we don't
yeah,
always know where the boundary is going to be, like until we like discover that that's where the boundary should be.
right,
Um, like I think it's a lot of like trial and error, and like for me personally, like I don't know if this is like a common thing, but like when I do something wrong, my brain likes to attach to that and then dictate my whole worth based off of that one thing that I've done,
right, right,
contrary to all the other evidence that I have that indicates I am not the shittiest person that has ever existed on the face of the planet.
right.
It's like, and I just latch onto that and I'll like keep playing it over. And I'm like, okay, stop that, stop that. we,
Stop
we,
it.
there's only so many things that we can do about this thing that we did when we were like 13. There's like no way to go back and change that.
Right, right,
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to know where the boundary is until like you've had the opportunity to know that that's the boundary.
right,
And I think it takes a certain amount of like self-compassion to be like fucked up, but it doesn't mean that I'm like the most worst, like I'm the terrible human.
yeah,
And we can apply that to like other people as well, you know, like if we have that self-compassion, I think it might be a little bit easier to give that compassion to other people. It's like, yeah, they did this thing, but it's not necessarily the only thing that defines them as a person.
right.
um, yeah.
Yeah, someone told me the other day, like, I think I was feeling really insecure and worried about just some social situations, and um, the way they said it at first, I was like, ugh, I don't know if I like that, but it was true. It's like, well, you're probably just as good and just as bad as anyone. Um,
Mhm.
and that like really leveled the playing field in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
especially between this person and I, because we've had quite a bit of conflict. Um, and it did level it in such a way where I feel like I had more empathy and compassion for them,
Mhm.
because I was like, yeah, like I'm definitely not perfect, and I'm messy as anyone else, and like I try to be good as I can, but you know, if I'm like freaking out or something, I might have to hole up in my apartment or something. Like
Mhm.
it's just like things get hard sometimes, and I was just thinking about that, and you never know what things are going to come up until you're interacting with people, right? It's like, oh, I didn't know that was there, but it sure is. um
Yeah.
uh, I was thinking too about like earlier today, this morning, I couldn't really sleep, so I got up super early and I watched this podcast, and their subject was jealousy, and they were talking about like I was trying to figure out exact words to make this part relate, but they were talking about that tendency we have, like when we start feeling super anxious about like, oh, this person has something that I don't, or like especially in like relationships and stuff, like this person is so much better than I am, and we're essentially, what we're doing is we're kind of looking at the things that we feel we lack, or the things that aren't as great in us, and comparing it to the best we see in this other person, or this other situation. And I don't know, I've just been like chewing on that all day, and just thinking about how that's I don't know, it's a different kind of boundary, a necessary boundary we put between ourselves and someone, and other people or ideas, to like and it's super unhelpful. But I'm trying to figure out, there's like a link there somewhere. I just can't figure out the exact words. It wasn't just some random thing I wanted to plug in here. Not particularly.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying kind of reminds me of like, when people say like you get irritated with someone, it's like you're getting irritated with the thing that you get irritated about yourself about. Like you're mad at what they're doing, but
Right.
you're like mad at that you see yourself in what they're doing. Like that's kind of what that reminds me of, a little bit. It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of, it reminds me too of like that whole, like the thing we love about someone sometimes, and when we first meet them, and it becomes the thing that's like, oh, after a while, if we're not careful,
like drives you up the wall.
like, oh my gosh. And you forget that you used to think that was real cute.
Yeah. I mean, like, an example that comes to mind for me is like my wife's a night shift worker, right? Like, so she can fall asleep at the drop of a hat. And I used to think that that was real cute, that she would just fall asleep on the couch while we were like maybe having a conversation or watching something. And, you know, that didn't always stay cute. But it's still like just a part of that person. So it's just, I don't know. I think it's again, coming back to that, like having compassion while also like trying to figure out what you can and can't abide. Like it's still that both and situation. And I think like us as people, we're the only ones that get to like decide what we just can't handle. Like we just can't do this.
Right.
And I think that changes over time. I really do. I think that changes.
I know I've come up against a lot of those things where I'm just like, I can't. And I know something I'd like to work on is more grace. Like when I'm at that point, like I cannot. Usually it's just like, I'm done. Like if I've made it to that point, you know. So like the grace is like, you know, allowing for the other person to have some warning.
Yep.
You know, like some kind of, you know, not just like all of a sudden a chop.
Yeah, I'm still learning to do that myself, like just communicating in an open way. I don't think I learned to do that growing up. So it's just, it's a process of learning how to do that. Just communicating more honestly and openly with the people around me. Yeah.
What are you reading right now?
Reading? Oh man, like I was like trying to figure out what I was gonna answer to that. Like one of the things that I'm having difficulty with during this pandemic is like reading. I'm just having a lot of trouble with it, like just sustaining the focus to get through like a really long like written work has been quite challenging. And I think like that's partially because like, you know, I'm a mental health therapist. I'm counseling people during a pandemic. That's very emotionally demanding.
Yeah.
Like I've dealt with depression on and off, and like I see like the concentration difficulties being one of those remnants. Even when it does lift, like I still have a lot of difficulty sustaining attention, and I
Right.
feel like there's a combination of those things happening right now. There's just so much shit that I have to cope with. That's like when I turn to a book, it's like I don't know what's gonna happen, and I don't know if I can handle not knowing what's gonna happen in this story.
Yeah.
So I've been reading a lot more manga lately, like, and graphic novels, just because it's mostly picture.
Right.
And like my favorite manga right now is called Murciélago, which is like bat in Spanish. And like it is just the most twisted story ever, and it's great, and it makes me so happy. And like there's just a lot of dark humor, and there's a lot of queerness that rolls into it, and like the artwork is just so highly stylized. It's beautiful, and I love that the writer is like interweaving all this mystery into the plot line. So that's the one that I've been reading most. In terms of like books, like written books, I've been trying to work on getting through like Nalo Hopkinson's Falling in Love with Hominids. I think that's the name of it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one that I've been trying to read a little bit more of. It's like short stories, so makes it a little bit easier for me to like stay in it.
Right.
You know? So that's the one that I've been like coming back to when I have the capacity to read something a little bit longer.
Awesome. I know those blues about reading like more
Yeah.
graphic novels and such right now.
What are you reading? What have you been doing?
It's funny because I just there's like a queer pen pal project that La Conexión is doing. I don't know if you know about La Conexión. Someone asked me that question, and so I took my stack of books and I'm looking at my phone because I'm trying to find the list. I think I took a picture of it because I was like, this is silly. I have a bookmark in all of these books. I could go down the list if you want me to. There's like about 8, 12, 14, 15 books, I think.
Yeah.
And so some of the ones that I think, let's see, I keep trying to read On Revolution by Hannah Arendt. And I keep reading the same 3 pages over and over again. I have a bookmark in Sisters of the Yam. I'm slowly making my way through Roski's beautiful chapbook catalog of unabashed gratitude, which is so beautiful. I mean, it's just like the title says. He's talking about just like all of these connections he has with people, and just like really recognizing the beauty in every moment. And it's really beautiful. And I want to start reading A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None. That just came in the mail. And How to Lose a Country by, I don't know how to say her name, but it's ECE, and her last name is TEMELKURAN. And she's pretty much talking about how fascism like builds in a country, and how she saw it in her country and in the UK, in the UK, and now here. So she wrote it as kind of like trying to warn people about it, talking about everything from what happens in language in the media to what the landscape all of a sudden looks like. It's really interesting and really bone chilling too.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like that's so like the stuff that you're reading is like serious.
I know that's. And I'm also watching Avatar, so. But I haven't really been reading very much. I think I read. What did I just finish reading? Yeah, I haven't been reading very much because like that was my stack. That's from my stack from before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic hit and I had this big stack of books. Like that's just some of them. And because I constantly have this urge of like, I want to learn how to be better. I want to learn how I can help. And I want to learn like if there's a nuance there, can I be there at the right time so that it doesn't,
It doesn't
hit.
happen again.
Yeah. Or, I mean, and that's a big responsibility to put on yourself, like I know folks on front lines of many different movements, and they're there for specific reasons, and it's definitely not for the faint of heart, and probably not the kind of earnestness that I have, if that makes sense. Like the whole like, what can I do? Like they are doing, and not I mean, I think there is that question of like, what can I do? And there's just the action looks different. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like we've run in some of the same circles. So like I know a lot of people who are doing just such tremendous work, like really activist, very much like ground level work. And I mean, for me, when this most recent wave of protests hit, like I've definitely been one of the people that's been like out there marching and like doing that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
I can't do that right now because like my wife's a critical care nurse. She works around people who have been exposed to COVID, like, so I don't feel like it's responsible for me to go to a place with that many people. And they haven't consented to being around me, like, so there's just like, I don't think that it would be correct for me to do that. But that's like the action that I've taken in the past. So I was like trying to figure out like, well, what can I do in this context? Like, what can I do? And so it like showed up in different ways, like donating, like the current project that I'm doing on like social media, like those are the ways that I know that I can actually do something. But sometimes it's like really hard to figure out, like you've got this desire to take action, but trying to figure out what that action isn't always super clear.
It isn't always super clear. I've found myself kind of accidentally stepping into the role of like consulting for like sensitivity.
Like sensitivity reading?
Yeah, which I'm nervous about, but it's happened 3 times, a couple paid. And like it's just not really a direction I ever thought of going. And then when that happened, I was like, this is definitely something I can do, because like there's a bunch of very well-meaning people, and it's really important to. So I always like to think of it from Starbucks, what I learned from the supervisor manual way back, like 8 years ago or something. I learned something called the Latte Method. And so you listen, and then you acknowledge, and then you thank, and then you take action, and then you encourage some action after that. Like in Starbucks terms, probably encouraging them to return with some kind of kickback, or we'll, the take action is like, we'll remake your drink or whatever. And it's just something I learned from Starbucks. But I remember when I heard that, I was like, this is like high level communications that you go to get your doctorate to learn. You know what I'm saying? And so like, that's kind of like the basis of it. I feel like for a lot of things, because people are asking people questions like, what is for a D&D book? And they're talking about orcs. I don't know if you know the issues with orcs. And people get a lot of in raps about the orcs, I guess. And so I've definitely learned a lot about the history of orcs. Like they're from Tolkien world, and they were created by an evil wizard or whatever. And in these books, the language surrounding the orcs, no matter where you look, is very othering. It's absolutely othering. And so like, how do you talk about that?
Yeah.
Like freaking orcs.
Yeah, and like if we look at like the origins of orcs, like if we look at Tolkien's like writing, it's like everybody is fucking white.
That's
how
true.
do you exist on a planet where everybody is white, but
Except
like
the orcs.
except the orcs? Except the orcs, they are so melanated, and you're like, so what? What, seriously? Like, how does this work? I don't.
Right?
It doesn't make quite a lot of sense. Like, if you have melanin in like some faction of the world, I feel like it would exist in other places. But of course,
Yeah.
we're talking about a white man who wrote a book a very long time ago, and this was going to happen. I think it's really funny though, like when people revisit like tropes that existed like a really long time ago, like elves and stuff like that. Elves have been around a long time in fantasy. And like orcs is another one that keeps coming up that exists in like really high fantasy. It's like really interesting to see like how people perpetuate the shit that existed when that originated.
Right.
And like there's so many different ways that you can rewrite that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
There's I got to work with him for a minute, but I was going through stuff, so I wasn't able to finish my work with him. But Chris Spivey, he did Harlem Unbound, which is like a Cthulhu mythos, obviously black role-playing game. It takes place in Harlem. And he had been working on another one, like a Wild West horror kind of thing, and it had tons of research that went into it. He had a historian on board, and just a lot of different awesome people to like really look at landscapes, and the people that existed there, what life looked like, and we found a lot of black cowboys, and we found like obviously a lot of native folks, and all kinds of people, and then all of the different like cultures of like hoodoo and magic and all of these different kind of spiritual things that came in and stuff too, because it was kind of like one of those games, like, so I think sometimes they have special powers or something like that, and there are ghosts, so we're looking at old ghost stories and why those ghost stories exist, and that's so cool, like so cool, and it's not happening enough.
Oh my god, I love that. What did you say that person's name was again?
His name is Chris Spivey, Spivey.
I'm gonna have to look that up later because that sounds like something that would definitely be up my alley. Love
that. I was trying to get like the writing and color group at Lighthouse to maybe do one of his RPGs, but it just kind of went, oh yeah, that's a neat idea, and then like just in the group, on our Facebook group, I was like, it'd be cool, but I don't feel confident to like DM, so I just like put it out there, hope something would happen.
Yeah.
But so what else is going on in your life that you want to talk about?
What else is going on in my life that I want to talk about? I don't know. I feel like there's just like so much stuff that's happening. Like there's so much to contend with right now. Like another thing that just popped up today was like the Supreme Court made that ruling on like LGBTQ workplace protections. The first article that I read about the decision only included that like they had ruled that discriminating against sexual orientation is not allowed by law, but then I found out that they actually included trans people also in that decision. And I was like, oh, yeah, for real? Yeah. Like, really? Like, we didn't just get, like, left behind in the closet out here? Like, real? Somebody gave a fuck about us? So, like, I don't know. Like, Orange Baby Hands, like, made that, like, passed that rule about And I refuse to say that man's name.
I try not to.
Yeah, he's Orange Baby for me. Like he made that ruling about being able to access like care and the rule like aligning gender with biological sex. Like that was the definition of it.
Yeah.
And so that came up, and then we've got BLM and all the protests and like just COVID and pandemic. I feel like it's just my life right now has been like, how do I cope with all this stuff? Okay.
Yeah.
Like, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And then like I've been having a lot of housing difficulties, like with my landlord, and like
Oh no.
just that messaging of like people of color are valued less than property has been like I couldn't get away from it for like a couple of months. So
Right.
it's been a lot. I feel like 2020 has in short been a dumpster fire. Like,
yeah.
yeah, like I had such high hopes for 2020, and it's just like I feel like I need to light a candle for it because it died. It died a long time ago, and like right now we're just living like we're getting haunted by its ghost because it's mad it couldn't like fulfill its life.
Right.
That's what like 2020 has been to me. So like I think one of the ways that I'm coping with it is just trying to like get the writing done, figure out where I'm living in a month, and then try and stay in contact with the people that bring quality of life to my life.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of folks that are running in the community, like in the queer community, the trans community, and like Black persons and Latinx persons, like we're trying to deal with all this shit.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard sometimes to be working towards a specific goal when you have all these other things that you have to manage.
Thank you for saying that, because I know I'm beating myself up every day about like just like what do I want to do right now, or what can I do right now, like what do I want my life to look like. But like that's the thing, is it's like this is what we have, is like right here, what's in our face. And that and that's definitely new. I'm used to moving all of the time towards something. Maybe I don't necessarily know what, but always moving towards something. And now I'm just sitting here. And that's I mean, they tell you like anytime you get into meditation or therapy or anything, it's hard looking at the stuff that's right in front of you. And I keep reminding myself that I get to do that now. And remembering that, like you said, like surrounding yourself with good people, surrounding yourself with people who bring that quality. And I think I've always been afraid to do that before. Outside of like working relationships. So like I started noticing like all of my relationships were like work oriented in some way. That's not working anymore, because none of us are working necessarily, or we're working at home, or I don't know.
It's just changed. Like this pandemic has changed so much in how we like relate to each other. I don't know, like last year when I was getting close to like my top surgery, I was like, okay, I've been working really hard towards this for like a year, 2 months, and 4 days. Like this has been a long time coming, and it's been really hard. And I haven't been dedicating as much energy to like the writing works that I want to complete. And so like last year, I had set the goal to finish like Dice and Lucy, that manuscript I've been working on, by August. And like the world's like turned over like 3 or 4 times. Just in terms of, it's just so many things. I'm gonna try and not be mad at myself if I'm not able to finish it by August. Because realistically, like I didn't know that there was gonna be COVID. I didn't know all the shit that happened. Like I didn't know that my life was gonna get upended like 3 or 4 times. Like how am I gonna be mad at me for a decision that my past me made without knowing what current me was going to be facing.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked a little bit about self-compassion earlier in like a talk. I think it's just really relevant right now, like especially like for people who identify as writers, because there were all those memes early on when the pandemic hit, like, oh, now I have all this time, let me write all those books I didn't write. I was like, that's not the situation we're in. This is not a vacation. It's not vacation. So like I'm just trying to be a little bit more like, it's okay if you can't get it all done right now. There's a lot that you're contending with in order to get closer to your goals. So just take it a little bit at a time. That's what I keep telling myself.
A little bit. And I think, I mean, that's a good, I think a little bit is good, you know? It's like, put the dishes away. I put the dishes away today.
Yeah, like I took a shower, damn it.
I rode my bike around the park one time. And I took a shower. That's pretty good.
Yeah. I could not, because like, where am I going? Like, I'm at home. So like, it's, I don't know, doing small things really, really matter. It really do. And just being grateful that you can do those small things.
Yeah, that's
the difference.
That's a good reminder. Lead with gratitude. I know sometimes you want to slap them.
I get so mad at people who would like call crises like opportunities. Like I'm just like, stop. Stop calling it
opportunities for growth and whatnot.
I hate that. I hate that so much. Yeah. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. There's just so much to deal with. I don't know. I think there's just trying to bring some humor into like that, like lead with gratitude. Everything's an opportunity. Like things that make it so simple. It's like, this life ain't simple. Like this is difficult shit right here. Like that kind of motto is there's got to be a little bit of gray in there. Like it can't just be black and white.
Flip the switch.
Let me just turn off my misery right now.
Yeah.
Be grateful. Yeah. It's so realistic all the time, you know.
So tell me the color of red. Like your office is very striking.
Yeah. This is just a red wall. There used to be a kayak here. The kayak's name is Chewy. I had to move Chewy to the other side because I wanted to have somewhat neutral background for when I was like counseling my clients.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was a lot to be introducing Chewy to all the people that I was meeting with. I was just like, let me just move the kayak. So it's just a red wall. There used to be stuff on there, but
got it.
Anymore. Yeah, but like I got this chair though.
Yeah.
This chair. His name is Osorio.
Osorio.
Osorio. His name is Osorio because Osorio is awesome and I love him. And like he matches this red wall. So this was not intentional. It just sort of happened. I think it looks great on screen, so I just
does.
it.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Like a lot of your pictures and things on social media, your messages, you have this very striking, and I'm always like, your office is
it's a multi-purpose room at this point. But it's just painted very brightly. Yeah.
Well, do you have anything else that you like to talk about?
Yeah, I was wondering like because you submitted to our writing group not too long ago those poems that like just hit real hard about like sexual assault and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What you've been working on?
I feel like I've been writing stuff, but I forget about it. And actually, that poem for during this whole shelter in place time, I've been debating on whether or not to tag it onto the front of the manuscript that I just sent out, which has to do with like familial estrangement and identity as a mixed race person, and moving towards reconciliation is what I always say, because I do want to move towards reconciliation, and it's really hard. And I mentioned it a couple places in that manuscript. And so I felt like a lot of the feedback I got was that the poems up front weren't very strong. And especially that first one, where I start reconciliation is dead, because of the, the Native stuff that was going. I don't want to, like, because Native women were being raped and killed, and missing and lost and disappeared. And I also started thinking about a lot of other stories. I started thinking about lover stories, mom stories, my stories, friends' stories, and I feel a little guilty about mentioning them in passing, but it's a catalog of why I don't know when reconciliation comes. And so I decided that I did just put it at the front of that manuscript. And there's a literal page-long pause after that poem, because even rearranged, they're not as strong, the other poems and prose and whatever, but I'm hoping that there's an arc enough to explain where I'm coming from. It's like, this thing needs to be spoken, it needs to be called out, and it needs to be that the reasons why this is a problem needs to be said. And then the working through reconciliation part is a lot of hard work. And so, like, I've been doing that work for years, like I've had to be in therapy because of this book. And like, because essentially that's what it is. It's like a performative movement towards reconciliation, and I don't get to it towards the end, because I say I don't know when reconciliation comes, because this is still in our bodies, and you haven't said sorry. So like, there's some things I've learned since initially writing it, so I've still been working on it. And I think this is where my work has been, is like just the struggle of like, do I add the things that I've learned now? Do I like break it apart and only do certain parts of it and take out the parts that are kind of not resolved, right? And then of course, any of us who have done our own work or worked with others in these realms of healing, like it could take a lifetime. And a book it becomes a different thing once you send it out there. And so that's what I've been working on, is just like having, I don't want to say bravery, but being able to let it go, like let it out there and have whatever life it's going to have, and have whatever effect it's going to have, if it's going to have an effect. And I'm scared. Like, I know I need it to be published, but I am scared.
It's a big deal, like it's a big step. I think just the willingness to work towards reconciliation in and of itself is like a giant feat, like to get that will to happen. I mean, there's a lot of things in my life where I'm just like, I have no will to reconcile with that person.
Yeah.
Fuck them.
I want to be that way sometimes, because it's just like, I feel like in a lot of ways it's healthier. It's just like one of my best friends, she's like, that's how you calibrate you were doing this even too. So that like, there's that gauge, and like, if you're like, fuck them, whoa, that's a lot of clear space, and like, you can just move forward. But like, if you're constantly trying to figure out how to go the other way, right, and you're always moving or whatever, it's like, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder, and I don't know who's equipped to do that, because it's just, I think one thing that I'd really like to see in reconciliation is communities holding space for all parties involved, as much as possible. And it's hard to do that because our communities aren't supported.
Mm.
And so like those, I've been kind of looking for texts surrounding that. Like I actually did find, there were these folks from Reykjavik, I think.
Mhm.
And it was a rape. It was like a date rape that happened. And they both carried it with them and didn't quite know what was wrong for really, because they didn't have words for what happened. They didn't have words for their experience. And they came back together and they talked about it and they reconciled it. And now they go and have these talks and stuff, and they have a book. And they, you know, and even in her TED Talk, she's like, I can't remember their names right now. I wrote it somewhere, but she's like, why can't you be like just like a normal person and just be like, fuck them, and like, you know, do whatever you need to do to be okay, instead of, you know, going back and I don't want to say rehashing, because that's not what they did. They looked at it and they're like, this is how this hurt me. And listened and acknowledged, and they thanked each other and they took action, you know, like in that Latte Method thing. And then they also made it into a gift for other people. If they are able to do that work of reconciliation, because that's the other thing, right? It's like, if you do something shitty, and probably all of us have done something real shitty, we have our turn to be a demon in someone's life, I think someone said. And I'm not saying rejoice in that or anything. It's just like a really hard thing. You can't take that thing away, that whatever it was, like whether you meant to or not, it's still someone's experience, and you can't take that experience from them. You can't change it. But you have to change, right? So like, I think that's how I've been doing my work, is just asking these kinds of questions, because they're really important to me, because I do see multiple sides of different situations, and I am heartbroken by like that thought that like sometimes you have to cut the cancer out. Like, this is one of my teachers said, sometimes you just have to cut the cancer out. And I was like, what? No. And then of course, you know, if you study like psychopathy, like how, you know, how do we work with people with psychopathy in society? They become our leaders, apparently. Anyway, I don't want to get into that, but like there are certain things that might not be we might not be able to remedy, and that is really hard for me to come to terms with. That's really, really hard for me to come to terms with. I actually stopped studying with that teacher because he said that, because I was like, no, I disagree. And I didn't disagree. I just didn't want to believe it. I didn't want that to be true. But,
and I think that's okay. You know, not knowing when reconciliation happens or if it's going to happen. I think we've all got our own journeys on trying to figure out what is right for us.
right.
And like, what's going to be right for you is not necessarily what's going to be right for your teacher or for me. Like, it's kind of like it's your own journey. And I kind of see what you're saying, like with like trying to put this book out there, like what part in the journey does it have for me? Like how does this relate to my own journey right now?
Will it? Like, I don't even know if anyone will publish it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's got a lot of pieces and it's experimental, and it's like some parts of it probably aren't written that great. But it's out there now. I'm trying to get it out there because it's something that I need to do. Like, it's kind of like when you write, I don't know, the other day I was mad at somebody. And I wrote this really terrible thing. Like, I just had to get it out because like there were these emotions that I didn't want to carry because I care about this person. I'm like, and then I burned it. Because it was just like, what I needed to happen happened, and I exercised it in a way that was safe for all parties involved. And then I burned it because I really don't need to hold on to it. And then a book like, yeah, I definitely thought about burning that book, definitely different parts of it. And like, how do you, I mean, us as writers, we're going to readings, we're going to workshops, we're teaching and all these other things. Like, I think that's something I'm really afraid of, because then it looks like, I think sometimes, like, when you write some kind of book that means anything, like, all of a sudden you become an expert, and then you have to figure out how you're going to say it to other people when maybe you didn't even know. Maybe you don't even know, maybe you don't have words for it. Like, you have very clear understanding of what you're doing and why, I feel like. No?
Yeah, I guess eventually, in retrospect, I have a clearer idea.
And to be fair, it's taken time, right? Because you talked about some of your, yeah. And so I guess maybe we are experts. I'm just like, I always have that like imposter syndrome crap. Because it's just like, I know folks who are working in the healing communities who are like, who do social work and who are therapists and who, study equity and teach folks equity and etc. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of adhere to the idea that like we're the experts on our own lives.
Yeah.
But to be an expert on something, you have to continuously study something and grow with it. Yeah, and like I kind of see like what you're doing with like putting this book out there. Like I relate to that in just when I started submitting shit to get published. Like I was like, all right, I said I was gonna try, so I'm gonna try. And like you never really know exactly what's gonna be on the other side of that action. But for me, like it was really important to just take the action in and of itself. Like
just do it.
Core to do it. And like I chose to listen to that. And so like I think for you, like if you're feeling that like intuition is like, I have to do this thing, like this is something that must be done. I think taking that action in and of itself is a victory. Whether or not like there's something else that happens on the other side of it, I still think that's a victory there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I definitely need to acknowledge that. Just like, it's hard, like, going back to communities and families and stuff, like I wasn't taught to celebrate much. We didn't really celebrate a lot. So like, mom and dad brought home a car one time that I think about things too much. I'm like, y'all can't afford that. Like, I'm supposed to be happy about this car you can't afford, like I'm like 15 years old. Like, what? I mean, like, I know I should be happy. It's, but I'm not. It's like, it doesn't make sense to me. Or just like, even birthdays, like, were kind of, there wasn't like a lot of fanfare or anything. It was just like, and sometimes not even acknowledgement. And it wasn't meant. I think people were just in their headspace for like, they had to work and they had to do whatever they had to do. And so like, I didn't learn how to do that. So it's a good reminder to be like, I can make that choice now. So like, here's an example of something. We, carry these stories all the time. And one of my sad stories is like, I rented a base for summer because it was like $70 to rent the base all summer and go to the Boise School District and learn how to play it 5 days a week. So they'd have folks for their band, right? And I did rent the base. It was $36, and I wasn't able to go to classes. No one would take me and the bass to classes because at the time I didn't drive. It was like junior high. And then having this bass in my tiny room all summer, I had to have someone take it back to the school, and they carried it by the F hole instead of, so the F hole is that little S thing in the and so the neck and the F hole were broken somehow. And I was devastated because they called me and they're like, what the, this is like the only base we have. It's one of two. What did you do? You owe us money. And I was like, I didn't do it though. So it's like this really sad story, right? Someone else took it there and they broke it, and I never even got to play it. Like I think I did like some things. And then recently I was like talking with a friend who's teaching bass lessons, Michael Bissio in New York, and I've decided that it's not for me, but I needed to do this. I needed to do this exercise. And I said, oh, I could totally use music theory lessons. I never finished that, and I wish I had a bass. And I was like, wait, I'm 40 plus. I can make that decision. I can change that story. I don't have to carry that story anymore. So I went to Kalakmi Music, and I'm like, I want to rent a bass, and they gave me a bass, and it has a story with it that they can't tell me because of, you know, you protect people. It has some interesting like cracks and things that they've fixed over time, and so it has quite a history, and it's awesome. And I wish I had the headspace to keep with the lessons, but I don't. But I've done as much as I could, and I've had that experience, and it's like I don't have that same story anymore because I can change it at any given time. It's just not the right time if I'm ever going to do it. You know what I'm saying? And I need to learn how to do that for the rest of my life, and to celebrate, you know, like when the bass was here and it was in my apartment, it looked good there, and it was like, and it made me happy, you know. So
I definitely think that that's a victory in and of itself. Just like kind of like touching on like being a master of your own destiny, like being able to like take agency in your own life. And you know, for people who have been denied a lot of agency, for people who have had that, and I think like both of us have had that experience, like it's like you have to learn how to do that. You have to
every day. Yeah, because it's just like, it's a constant struggle. It's like somehow from a lot of different people, I got the message that I had to stand back, and that you know, and I see people all the time, like, who definitely don't stand back, and it's interesting to see who those people are. And like I've even not showed up in places because I didn't think I deserved to be there, or because or for whatever reason, you know. And so actually these chats is one of those things for me, is like getting over a lot of those kinds of things, like spaces where I've been stopped, or haven't been provided much guidance, or have been edited so much that it's not my work, or whatever. So I just decided, like, well, maybe it's this easy. I can just be my quirky, messy self and just talk to people. And it works or it doesn't work, but at least I get to talk with people and like have these conversations, you know. Which I'm really thankful for.
Yeah, me too. I've been enjoying following the series. Like I really enjoyed like the one that you did with Steven. I mean, like y'all are some of my favorite people, so I was definitely like, yay, let's watch this. So I mean, it's just like we talked about so much shit today. And I feel like we're coming back to a lot of the themes. It's like taking it a little bit at a time, that like we are the experts in our own life, that we can change and grow, and sometimes we don't know exactly what is the right or wrong thing to do, so I feel like we're coming back around to those ideas here of just taking a step if that feels real core, like trying to do that, follow through with that.
Step. And that's what we can do, right? If you can move, then you can dance. Like, if you move it all, you can move your eyelids. Like, if you have eyelids, you know, and that is, you know, that is movement. That's something. That does something. I have to remind myself of that every day too.
It definitely is. It's something, and like something is really meaningful. It just is.
Well, can you tell folks how to find you and how to support you?
Yeah, of course. So how to find me, like pretty much if you want to look at my website, it's just dlcordero.com. So that's my name in there in that little text box. If you type that into it should show up.
I'll put it in the caption.
Yeah. So like dlcordero.com, that will route you to like all my published works. It gives you like some general idea of who I am as a person and like what I've been working on. And then my handle for social media is DL Cordero Writes, like anyway, like WRTIES. And so people can find me on there. This month I am featuring artists, writers, educators, activists in the Black and trans, Black and queer community. Like that's kind of something that I've been focusing on. Especially there's maybe a couple of people that identify as cis-het, but they're like really allied with the community, and so that's why I included them in the series. But I really like encourage people to take a look at that, share the works that those people have created, like get those stories out there. Like that's the whole reason like I'm doing the thing, is like I want people to know who's doing this work and to support them. So I do encourage people to take a look at it. It's on Facebook and Instagram.
It's really great. Yeah.
Got some dope ass people who like agreed to do like some features, and I'm just trying to run stories exactly the way those people want to have them run. Yeah, so I really encourage people to take a look at that and support those artists, writers, creators in the ways that they can. Because those people really matter. Like they matter, and those stories need to be told and received, and I want that to get out there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for being with me, Tamika. I really missed you.
I know. We'll be back in writing group.
I know.
All right, I'm gonna close it up.
Okay. It was really good to see you.